Cheatham here with Nate Stroeher and Eric Kimberling, and today we're going to talk about what is technology agnostic. So Eric, let's start with you. How did you get involved in independent consulting and technology agnostic information?
Well, it started earlier in my career having worked for one of the big system integrators that was not software agnostic, finding that there was a huge amount of bias in the industry and the work that I was doing early in my career, and so that really just stimulated an idea or a perceived need for independence. Just because as I continue my career, I found that there's not a lot of consulting firms out there that are truly independent, so I thought it would be a good opportunity to start a consulting firm that specialized in ERP and digital transformation, but also one that was completely agnostic and representing clients' best interest rather than vendor best interest.
Sure. And Nate, if you were to define technology agnostic, what would you say?
I think it's best summed up that you're going to choose the best solution for your client. And I think it's important that with agnostic, when we talk about software agnostic or platform agnostic, technology agnostic, that we all have biases. So whether you know it or not, or whether you have your interest financially to lead someone to a platform or a technology, when you're agnostic, you're really you eliminate a lot of those biases, whether they're perceived or they're real. It's just you're giving them what's best for them.
Absolutely. And so when we talk about independence, let's just kind of lay it all out there for our audience. Do you have any relationship with vendors? We'll probably start with you, Eric. Any sort of financial kickbacks or anything like that?
Yeah, no, we don't have any sort of financial tie to vendors. So the key litmus test for us is, do we have anything to gain financially or otherwise by recommending any one solution? And if the answer is no, we don't have anything to gain, then we're being truly independent. Really all we care about is what the client's needs are and making sure we address the client's satisfaction and their operational needs.
So Nate, what if you had a bad experience with a previous vendor on another client or something like that? Do you ever take those biases or that information into your recommendations?
Well, I don't. I think it's kind of important. There's obviously people that you want to work with and that you don't want to work with, but I think it's important to know that with the big technology platforms, there's a team that you're going to work with. So just because you might have a bad experience with one individual on the team or one team out of many of their teams, that doesn't really represent the technology. So again, it's really back to the best fit for the customer. But there is also a little bit of a bias in the sense that we've worked around technology enough that we have a good sense of what is a good fit for customers. And we know with a lot of the implementation providers who are good to work with and who are going to be the better teams to introduce to a smaller customer, to a larger customer. So I would say that we're still agnostic, but we do know through our experience in over 20 years in this field who's going to be a best fit for certain customers.
Sure. So it sounds like you have industry insight as opposed to bias.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so, Eric, when you hire people at third stage, how do you make sure that they're not bringing any other vendor relationships or anything like that? What kind of expectations do you set for your team?
Well, it's a good question, because that's probably the hardest, or one of the hardest aspects of our business model, is finding good people that are knowledgeable of digital transformation, technology transformation, business transformation, all that stuff, but at the same time aren't solely focused on one solution. So typically we don't hire many, if any, consultants that had specialized in one solution and that's it. So someone with 20 years of SAP or Microsoft or whatever the type of experience might be wouldn't necessarily completely disqualify them, but those types of skill sets are harder to break out of that bias or that myopic focus on one technology. So most of the team members we have, if not all of them, have worked across technology platforms. Maybe not every one of them, obviously. Even I haven't worked with every system out there, but collectively, we hire people that have touched 2, 3, 4, 5 different systems throughout their careers, and they know how to deploy them. They know the strengths and weaknesses of each, and they just tend to have a more balanced view of the market than someone that grew up in one specific niche or one vertical.
Certainly. Yeah, that makes sense. So, Nate, do you ever experience client bias? Like, say, a vendor got to a client before they hired someone like third stage, and that client is like, I'm definitely going to need this software? And if so, how do you work through that?
Oh, you definitely, and almost every client, and in a positive and a negative way.
Yeah.
We've, without naming technologies, we'll start on kickoff calls, and someone will say, well, I had a bad experience with this software.
Mm-hmm.
We don't even want to consider it. In fact, a client that we kicked off 3 weeks ago said we're not looking at this technology, and now they end up being one of our shortlist vendors that we're going to be working with. So there's always that past experience of a good or a bad relationship with a software or with an implementation provider. I think the one thing that helps, that we always try and talk to our clients about, is that was a completely different situation, and not all past implementations that were either successful or unsuccessful are a result of simply the software or the implementation provider's performance. There is two people in that relationship. There's a client and there's the implementation provider. So as much as we can, coach them through the fact that was a past situation. The technology that you dealt with in the past is much different likely than what you're going to deal with today. And the more we can give them, try as much as we can to clear their mind of what happened in the past. But we're all human, and we all have emotional baggage that you deal with. And it's also in a positive way. Like, sometimes just because you had a good solution 15 years ago, the technology might not be good anymore. And so don't keep driving us down that road when we know there's a better solution that we could introduce you to.
Yeah, absolutely. And building on that, Eric, from a independent perspective, do you ever recommend something to a client and then they don't choose it? And what kind of happens with that situation?
Yeah, we have a subset of clients over the years that hire us because they want us to tell them what they want to hear. And so oftentimes you'll get a CIO or someone high up in the organization that is, to Nate's points, they're sort of leaning a certain way. They grew up, or in their past experiences, they have familiarity and comfort with a certain product. A lot of times it's one of the bigger vendors like SAP or Oracle or Microsoft. And a lot of times they'll sort of do their own evaluation. They'll come to the conclusion that they want that same solution for their organization, but there's not internal confidence in that direction, so they hire us to come in and do an independent assessment. So a lot of times we fight internal biases where you're telling the client, we need to tell the client the reality and the truth versus not necessarily what they want to hear. Sometimes it works out that it is what they want to hear, and it sort of validates the way they were thinking, but a lot of times it's a recommendation that runs counter to what their biases are. Now, there are times too where we make a recommendation and the client goes against that, and they'll say, well, we like the second option better for these reasons, or maybe they weight the criteria a little bit differently than what we had originally done in the assessment. And sometimes that's driven by bias and kind of getting to the answer they want. Other times it's just other forces at play in terms of them going in a different direction.
Yeah. And Nate, how do you collaborate with vendors, specifically when you're brought into a project that might not be on track or achieving the objectives that the client is looking for? How do you make sure that you treat the vendor as a partner, but you also maintain your independence?
I think what we try and do, or at least from my point of view and the teams that I work with, is you try and give everyone the same opportunity to succeed at a client. If they take that or not is really their game to win or lose. And a good example, and I keep going back to these examples that we've had in the last couple months, is a lot of the vendors will hold a discovery call with the client to learn before they fill out the RFP and before they do the demo, just exactly what the client's needs are and how some of the specific niches in their business can be satisfied. The vendors that want to come in and have these discovery sessions, and the more interaction they want to have with the client, they have the opportunity to, and we'll work with them to give them as much time in front of the client as they want and as they need. If a vendor doesn't want to do it, we've at least made the opportunity for them to do it. So again, I think it's just treating them all the same, giving them all the same opportunities, and really giving them the opportunity to succeed or fail based on their performance.
Interesting. And what happens if you have a bad demo, but the solution might be a good choice? Does that ever happen?
Yeah, I think it happens almost. Yes is the answer.
More than we'd like.
Yeah, there's a couple things, and a lot of times a vendor will shoot themselves in the foot, and they're done. What we try and do, and I think it probably we're successful about 95% of the time, is we try and have 2 or 3 solutions that are all going to be the right solution for our client. So if someone fails, we have 2 in the wings that are going to be a good solution. Some of the vendors will come in and say that just wasn't our best performance, and they'll have the opportunity to make it up to the client and come in and have either another demo or demo the pieces that they didn't really do a good job showing how they can match their requirements. So it's just kind of a case-by-case basis. But a lot of times you get one shot, and if you really blow it, you blow it.
Yeah.
And our job a lot of times is to differentiate between just a blown demo because the sales rep or the person doing the demo just isn't good, or they're just not connecting with the client's needs for whatever reason, versus ones where it truly is a problem with the technology, and that's why the demo bombed. There's a glaring deficiency in the product, therefore they couldn't demo it very well. So usually it falls into one of those 2 camps, and so a lot of what the values we bring is to help differentiate the difference between is it a product problem, or is it the way the product was demoed. And a lot of what we use too is just data from our own database, the quantitative data, to help either validate, is that consistent with what we saw in the demo, or is there some sort of discrepancy that we need to follow up on? Our data shows one story, and we have experience that tells one story, and then what we saw in the demo is something different, and we've got to figure out how to reconcile that.
And the one thing to add on to that, there's always 2 parts to a demo. There's the technology fit, and vendors are gonna, they're all, if they've made the short list, they're going to be pretty comparable as far as being able to meet the needs of the client. And then there's that whole cultural fit, the soft side of it. And I think the worst thing that a vendor can do, and the quickest way to not have a repeat demo or not have a second chance to come in, is if they just didn't pay attention to the client, if they just didn't take the time to learn their business. Those are usually the tougher sells to get them back in the door, to show their product. If it's something that it was, there's technology glitches, there's misunderstandings as far as what a client's told the vendor. There's always going to be those situations, and for the most part, people are putting a lot of money and a lot of time into this process. And if they think that it's something worth pursuing, they'll give them a second chance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you guys have a lot of kind of hard or maybe uncomfortable conversations with clients when we talk about, recommending a technology that they might not have thought of before, or they have had a bad experience with, or the demos and making them kind of consider a demo that didn't go very well. Eric, how do you build that trust with your clients so that they really do kind of blindly trust you in these situations?
Well, I'd say, first of all, that most clients have a high level of trust just because of the independence of the technology agnostic model. So they know that we're not being driven by our own self-interest. We're not out to try and make commission on anything, because we don't make commission on our recommendations. But I think that just as big of a problem is having the tough conversations around maybe a product that could be a good fit that a client is biased against. I'd be curious to see if you agree with this. It seems like more often than not, though, it's the opposite. It's that there's a bias toward a product, and we have to say, hey, we know you're enamored by all these cool bells and whistles, but the reality of how we're seeing this deployed at other clients tells this story. And so you sort of have to deflate their optimism a little bit, which that sometimes is even harder than convincing them that a product they think is terrible or isn't a good fit, convincing them that it is. So it goes both ways for sure. I don't know if it's greater than 50-50 or whatever. But.
Yeah, and we just had that conversation this week with a customer that said, you've recommended what we'll call 3 of the big 4 mid-market solutions, and they said we really want to maybe look at some of the open source solutions. We want to look at some of the smaller players. And we had to have that conversation to say, there are a lot of really good things about that. However, you have a really small IT budget. You have a small IT department.
Yeah.
There's so many things that keep you from wanting to pursue those opportunities because you're just setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah.
So, but sometimes the client wants to look at that solution, and you let them look at that solution and let them learn for themselves, and sometimes that's what it takes.
Yeah, yep, definitely. Those resources are so important. Eric, when it comes to the overall competitive nature of independent or technology agnostic firms, why aren't there more of them?
Well, I think just having started, 2 independent technology agnostic consulting firms now, I would say it's a lot harder because to start an independent firm because you're not getting the support of software vendors. If you were to open up shop tomorrow that aligns with one of the big software vendors, they're going to immediately give you certification, they'll give you leads, they'll give you marketing support,
Sure.
and you sort of get wrapped into their whole ecosystem. So in the short term, it's a lot easier just to start a VAR or a
Yeah.
consulting firm that's aligned with the software vendor. But like I said, there's plenty of them out there. I don't know how many there are, but if you look at SAP and Oracle and Microsoft and all the different consultants out there that focus on that, there's tons of them. So I think that's probably the biggest thing. And the other part of it too, getting back to one of the earlier points about hiring and how difficult it can be to find good consultants that have broad experiences, there's just not a lot of them. Most consultants come up through their career focusing on one technology. So if they're going to start a consulting firm, chances are they're going to do what they know best, which is to focus on that one technology. So I think those two things combined are probably why there's not more independent firms out there. Is just that sort of experience bias, and then also the fact that it's just easier in the short term to have a big vendor like SAP or Oracle or Microsoft feeding you leads and helping you get the firm off the ground.
Absolutely, and I think we can kind of wrap up on that note. So if you are a company or a company is watching this and they're considering not hiring an independent consultant, what are some of the risks associated with that?
Well, I'd say the biggest thing is just the biases, everything we talked about and that Nate was talking about with client biases. Organizations that don't implement various ERP systems for a living simply can't know what there is to need to know about the digital transformation and software space. So you're going to be limited by your own biases, by your own blind spots, and you're going to succumb to the pressure or the spun messaging that you get from vendors, which typically is going to mismanage expectations, and you're going to be overly optimistic, and it's not realistic, the picture that gets painted from software vendors. So if you don't know that, if you haven't been through that process, if you don't have an independent advisor, that's just going to further complicate things.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think there's a process that you go through with every selection and digital transformation project that there's important steps to take every time, and I could use different analogies for self-improvement, that sort of thing, but that it's those steps that really weed through what Eric referenced, and that is a vendor has their set way of showing you what their solution is, and it's obviously going to be the best way for them to highlight their strengths, and by using a real set methodology of examining, defining your requirements, examining all the different technologies and how they can not only satisfy your requirements but work with the other systems, and really look at that whole picture, you're really putting yourself in a much better position to control what the vendors are showing you versus them coming in controlling what they show you.
Yeah, it sounds like project ownership really is a main objective there.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much both for your time. If you have questions about more technology agnostic recommendations, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or reach out to Nate and Eric. Their contact information is below.